Welcome to Gas, the true story of a toxic train derailment. I'm Ron Scholl. Last time on Gas, 19 months after the Alberton derailment and toxic chemical spill, a Montana Rail Link runaway train ran full speed and backwards downriver, threatening to derail near or in Missoula. And emergency responders had no idea what cargo the train carried. We now continue with Part 3, Chapter 7, The Black Hole. Epigraph. I always deny all things. Tom Ellerhoff, Montana DEQ. The Montana Department of Environmental Quality formed in 1995 after the Department of Health and Environmental Services split, a sundering that spawned the genesis of Tom Ellerhoff's mantra, DEQ Environmental Health, Public Health, Individual Problems. In January 1998, ACCEH wrote the Montana Environmental Quality Council that DEQ had ignored local citizen complaints while catering to corporations, and recounted the DEQ response to the Plum Creek loggers and the Missoula Electric Co-op. They wrote, local residents were considered safe in the hot zone, but corporate employees were at risk and accommodated. Lucinda Hodges said, DEQ never even acknowledged a letter that we sent them. They've never written us anything. Hope Sieck called DEQ a black hole for residents' questions and complaints. Lisa Mosca and Sieck trekked to Helena in early 1998 to interview Ellerhoff, the administrative officer for Montana DEQ, who had oversight on the Alberton remediation. A slight man with thinning hair, glasses, and bow tie, Ellerhoff claimed to Sieck and Mosca that testing of the Alberton site indicated that there was no detectable levels of contaminated material in that area. In fact, trace contaminants remained, as well as an odor, as acknowledged by DEQ elsewhere. The two women were about to be given a lesson in the bureaucracy dance. Sieck asked Ellerhoff if he or the agency had been out to the site. Ellerhoff: I've been out there about 7 or 8 times, and I went out there soon after it was hydro-seeded. And usually what happens is, when I'm in Missoula and I'm at a meeting, instead of going to lunch, I get a sandwich and I drive to Alberton just to look around, walk over the area, check the area. The only thing that's puzzled me is the corn. There's corn growing, and I asked the guy for the responsible party that was in charge of the reclamation, why is there corn going out there? Well, stuff falls off the trains and gets into the... This was a freshly seeded site, Ellerhoff said. Sieck tried to keep him on track. When you're out there, do you meet with the local concerned citizens? Ellerhoff: Generally not. Usually it's a noon hour, and I have to get back to a meeting, so I don't have a whole lot of time. So the people part of it is a different matter. Todd Damrow of State Health, and the ATSDR people are more accustomed to dealing with individuals and illnesses. Sieck: But clearly there's a link between the site and the health. What about residents' complaints of feeling ill in the area? Ellerhoff: First of all, one of the problems with something like this is you have this huge range. He gesticulated with spread hands. You have people over here who can be exposed to chlorine, and a few minutes later, they forget it. You have people over here who are slightly exposed and who will remember it, certainly the rest of their lives. Here's this huge range, and the thing that happens is that, of course, as time goes by, the people in the middle probably will have a tendency, at least this is the way it's been explained to me, people in the middle will have a tendency not to remember it as often. And maybe once in a while in the spring, when the water is chlorinated by the local community, the water system, it'll take them back. People who are here, who are highly sensitive, it doesn't even take that for them to recollect back. People over here may be the people who helped clean up the site, and it's gone, it's totally out of their mind. So you're dealing with this huge range of exposure of how people react to these sorts of things. Ellerhoff equated health responses with memory. You're putting me in an area, Ellerhoff protested mildly, which isn't my area of expertise. This is just how it's been explained to me. Sieck tried to emphasize that symptoms were physical, not memories of bad times. Ellerhoff: Continuing with this story, when Todd and I talked to each other, we said, well, probably the best thing to do is to advise people. if they believe they have an illness that might be associated with this accident, to go to their doctor and have their doctor examine them, and then to tell their doctor or give their doctor their permission to talk to the local health folks, to talk to ATSDR, to talk to other people in the medical community, so you can establish this basic information regarding these illnesses and have a physician who will back up that information. So that's what we advise people to do. Now, as far as I know, in talking to the local health people, they haven't had doctors calling them. And so that seemed to me the soundest approach, at least from our perspective. Certainly, I'm not an expert in that field. Our area of expertise is the environment and not public health. Ellerhoff deflected victims' direct complaints while suggesting he was open to listening to local doctors or health officials, assuming victims or doctors knew about this procedural maze. Ellerhoff: the other thing, though, when Todd and I talk about this, is it's easy to dismiss people's illnesses at this point in time. And yet, there may be somebody out there with a justifiable effect from this. So that's why we haven't closed the books. ATSDR is doing some work out here. We by no means have dismissed this. It's simply, from the environment side, we haven't seen any scientific information that says there's anything there. What about odor complaints? Sieck asked. Actually, there were some mercaptans that had kind of hung around, Ellerhoff said. But mercaptans tend to smell bad, but they break down pretty fast too. In fact, to find out about mercaptans, I had to track down one of the persons that was hired by the EPA. And when I first went out to the site, you could smell it a little bit, but the second and third time I went out there, I couldn't smell a thing. And this is the sort of thing, it's the type of material, or it's the type of smell that probably the creosote in the rail ties the second time smelled worse than anything I could smell from the mercaptans. Sieck: what was the pesticide smell attributed to that was reported so often? Ellerhoff: that was the potassium cresslate, I believe, mixing with some of the chlorine. It formed some compounds, some phenol compounds, and that was the pesticide smell. Ellerhoff's academic training was in forestry, he now explained, 6 hours short of a degree. He wasn't a scientist, he said, despite that environmental science was allegedly DEQ's area of expertise. He got involved with science journalism before he started writing environmental impact statements for the state of Montana. Mosca adjusted the focus back on exposure and illness. Mosca: when you say that certain people remember more about the chlorine than others, did you mean that certain people get sick more in response? Because there's a big difference between people's memory of an incident that was really unpleasant and whether they are more susceptible to exposure based on higher exposure. Ellerhoff: you're basically asking me a question that if I gave you an answer and it went to court, they would say, what does this guy know about this? Mosca: what about when human health concerns are not satisfied by remediation? Ellerhoff replied that victims with unsettled claims must go to court, deflecting Mosca's question about health concerns and remediation. She then tried to ask a question about the possibility of other chemicals being in the air initially and the lack of initial air monitoring, adding, the initial exposure is something that's unknown, she said, because there was no one on the site at 4 a.m. Ellerhoff: actually, there was one person who was on the site. Mosca: who was testing the air? Ellerhoff: no, who died. As Ellerhoff wandered, Sieck lassoed him. After the women brought up the meter reader complaints, Ellerhoff explained that DEQ's industrial hygienists went with Olympus when they set up the air monitoring stations at the site in December 1996. Ellerhoff: they didn't find anything, Ellerhoff said. So it was just a matter of one of those things where you just check out something that you can check out. That was part of that ongoing investigation. As I said, we're still investigating. Sieck: what have you done to check up on residents' complaints about continuing illness? Ellerhoff: normally what we do, as I've said, we tell them to go to your physician, go to the public health nurse, have an examination, and then allow that physician or that public health nurse to talk to the public health people that can help them, like ATSDR, like Todd, referring to Todd Damrow. The infinity loop, DEQ to public health and back. Sieck: do you do air monitoring and testing in the area where they are, like you did for the meter readers? Ellerhoff: after finding nothing at the site, we simply don't see any reason to. It doesn't seem, at the EPA report, the EPA report also says they didn't find anything. So, Sieck, so is there any chance of continuing health complaints leading to more investigation to try and... Ellerhoff, I think there's always a chance, We're not going to close the books until we have all the scientific evidence that we can that says there's nothing there that's detectable. We simply haven't at this date found it. And the best thing to do is look to the courts for that confirmation. Mosca was recording breathtaking doublespeak. Triplespeak, perhaps. Sieck, how are you pursuing getting to the point of being able to close the books? Ellerhoff, we base closing the book on the opinion of our remediation expert, of our hydrologist. The solid, the hazardous waste part that part has pretty much been dealt with as far as we can deal with it. What Ellerhoff meant was, except for the 3 site wells that monitor groundwater pH, the DEQ book was closed. Sieck, the residents were told that it was safe to move back in based on the test that you're talking about, that it was safe and that it was healthy and that it was fine. Ellerhoff, I believe that, and that opinion was an opinion based on the information that the EPA toxicologist helped make. Sieck referred again to Ellerhoff's May 1996 letter responding to Plum Creek about workers far from the site feeling ill. Ellerhoff, this was the work crew, and somewhere in the great stack, Ellerhoff genially smacked the Alberton file on his desk, is some correspondence regarding that. When the crews indicated that they were having headaches, our recommendation was, get out of there. And I believe that they then conferred with the responsible party and they came to some sort of arrangement. And I'm not exactly sure. Are you folks going to interview RailLink too? Sieck read from Ellerhoff's letter. The DEQ supports Plum Creek's decision and believes the temporary relocation would be in the best interest for all concerns. I'm just wondering about the people who lived right there, Sieck said. Was a temporary relocation thought to be advisable for them as well? Ellerhoff, probably it would have been based on how they felt, but I don't recall ever, those people may have left long ago. I simply don't know what the status of those people. Sieck, but were they informed of Plum Creek and the co-op's problems? Ellerhoff, well, we tried to work with the media as best we could to let people know. The corporate complaints were never reported in the media. We tried to work through the local health departments too. Maybe you got that copy of the letter from the local health department files? Despite Ellerhoff's claim in this interview that whatever is in my file here, there should be a duplicate in the Missoula City County Health Department and Mineral County Sanitarian Office, Hodges only procured the letter directly from Ellerhoff's own file. Ellerhoff, as I said, our MOU was, we'll take care of the site, we'll communicate with you, but the people problems, you're going to have to do the people problems. And we all did the best we could to have that interrelationship. And then I think I was on radio and TV over in Missoula, and we had our information person putting out some information. So, Ellerhoff clapped his hands in conclusion. You do the best you can with the resources you have. In simpler words, no. The residents were not informed of the corporate complaints. Sieck, do you feel the residents were treated differently from the employees from Plum Creek in that they weren't advised to relocate temporarily based on evolving situations? Ellerhoff, anybody who called us, we tried to help them the best we could in terms of advice, in terms of referrals. We didn't just hang up the phone and say, go see the health department. Click. And at those times, you're a public employee. People pay your salary. You should listen to them. You should try to help them the best you can and be patient. Sieck, patiently. Did anybody step back in and say, we've let everybody back in, but now we're getting new information that people are getting sick. We should perhaps reconsider and tell people that there's a problem and you might want to leave the area again? Ellerhoff, well, it goes back to public health versus environmental health. The opinions we draw are based on the best scientific information that we can get. And then based on that, we can make some statements. Public health is a lot different. You're dealing with a spectrum in public health. You're dealing with people who, at this end, are variously sensitive to some things, and people at this end who can walk through it all day, and, they don't even know it's there. I can't answer public health questions because it would be unfair to you for me to answer them. In terms of the environmental health, we tried to base our opinions and what we told people on the best information we had at that point in time. And that's why we shared it too. That's why we shipped it over to Missoula and Mineral County, because we hold an obligation to the people that they should have that information available to them. In his wandering, Ellerhoff had again let slip a reference to sensitivity as an actual, if vague, admission of a symptom. Sieck, we're just wondering why Plum Creek loggers were responded to and told that leaving the area would be best, and people 100 yards from the site were not. Ellerhoff hadn't told Plum Creek or the co-op to have a doctor complain to the health department instead of to him. Ellerhoff, well, they also asked for a letter because they needed a letter so they could ultimately come back with any claim that they may have against the railroad for, we were trying to work in this area, we were denied working in that area, we want some compensation for this claim. Note, the request for a letter was the only reason the incident was even documented in DEQ's files. There was no documentation in Ellerhoff's file of the initial Plum Creek phone call. Ellerhoff's response here also explained the style of his letter back to Plum Creek. It was crafted as a legal reference that Plum Creek could take to MRL. Ellerhoff continued, so it generally depends on how people do business. I think if you also look in the files, there were some property owners that wanted some letters, so we sent some letters for them too. So it was what people requested, and it was based on the information we had at that point in time. As you get more information, you can make better decisions and make different decisions. Mosca, would those letters be on the public record also? Ellerhoff, they're there. As I recall, there weren't a lot of property owners that requested that sort of thing. Hodges found no such public record of letters from DEQ to any residents. Mosca, if they were to come to you today and they lived within a certain area, would they still be able to get a letter? How does that work? Ellerhoff, are you trying to be an environmental attorney? They all shared a laugh. Ellerhoff, we tried to give people whatever they wanted when they asked for it. We weren't predisposed to giving some people letters and not giving other people letters. And when you're dealing with a company is pretty sophisticated in how they do business. If you are a frightened property owner with a young child and some dogs or cats had to be left behind, you're not thinking of that stuff. You're thinking, am I okay? Are my kids okay? Are my pets going to die? And so you're asking me a question I simply can't answer. The question Ellerhoff waltzed with at arm's length was, could people today still get a letter from the DEQ, just like the letter to Plum Creek, advising them to move from the Alberton site area if they felt it was causing them health effects? Ellerhoff, we simply tried to help people as best we could and give them what we felt we could. One of the interesting things, if you read about this at all, 1 full minute later, Ellerhoff concluded his longest tangent of the dance. Ellerhoff, and the interesting thing is, to my knowledge, no animals died. The only dead animal they found was a bird. They weren't sure about how the bird died, but in here, his file stack, I think they did an autopsy, and the autopsy was rather substantial in terms of what it cost, $300, and they never did figure out what killed the bird. So it was an interesting sidelight, but it was also an interesting aspect of how human nature works, Once you and your family are safe, what do you worry about next? You worry about your property or the things you really love. Ouch. The Inquisition is over? I can go play? Ellerhoff asked with preemptive hope. Sieck, you're right. Our area of focus has been more on the health issues. I didn't mean to get you out of your realm. Ellerhoff, that's okay. I always deny all things because Ellerhoff stopped himself and laughed awkwardly. End tape. Mosca and Sieck likely felt dizzy. What in God's name just happened? When the two women extracted themselves from the suck of their Kafkaesque journey to the edge of the black hole, they had a clear idea of the hopelessness of intervention by the state. Don't slam the book closed on your way out. The man in charge of oversight of the Alberton site remediation, who had no scientific background, begged off any questions about human health. He didn't know. He couldn't say. It wouldn't be fair to answer. To you. There was much he didn't know. He appeared to hold a unique belief that residents' health complaints signified bad memories of their initial exposure, perhaps triggered in the spring by the town's chlorinated water. Though DEQ was the lead agency after re-entry for investigating environmental contamination concerns that could be causing health problems, Ellerhoff passed residents on to local health officials or doctors. There had been no evidence of actionable contamination in June of 1996, and DEQ is not in the business of investigating further complaints that there must be. Ellerhoff appeared to simply believe the environment was safe. while promising the investigation remains open. But people complaining of pesticide odors emanating from the site and making them ill warranted no DEQ investigation or action. Corporate entities accepted. Despite the pleas for a DEQ public meeting in Alberton, for which DEQ had no budget, Ellerhoff had told Hodges, Ellerhoff revealed he'd been to the site 7 or 8 times, apparently on lunch breaks. But no, he did not meet with an actual human being, a resident from the area over which his agency had oversight. That would be a people thing for the people. Apparently, what Ellerhoff didn't know, he didn't want to know. But it was also clear that corporations had his ear. As for those complaining residents, yes, it might have been best for them to relocate, but they never asked for letters, and who knows, those people may have left long ago. The Plum Creek workers' experience should have raised red flags about safety for sensitized residents prior to removal of the contaminated soil. The meter readers' experience should have reinforced the complaints of victims long after soil removal. Instead, these stories, kept successfully out of the media by MRL and DEQ, had barely escaped the black hole. As Ellerhoff said, it was just a matter of one of those things where you just check out something that you can check out. Mosca and Sieck returned to Missoula. Any hopes orbiting Montana DEQ crushed to singularity. Next time on Gas, the true story of a toxic train derailment. ATSDR sets up a community advisory group for spill victims, and a power struggle quickly develops between ACCEH and the new Mineral County Sanitarian, who becomes head of the CAG. Meanwhile, over 2 years after the spill, ATSDR finally reveals some of the results of their 1996 health survey of Alberton spill victims. Until then, this is Ron Scholl. Thanks for listening. This podcast is adapted from the book Gas, the true story of a toxic train derailment. Visit Amazon.com to see the 2-book series. To access support material in the book, such as maps, photos, illustrations, and video links, visit my Facebook page Gas, the true story, or watch my Gas playlist on my YouTube channel at RL Scholl.